Hey YouTube. Here's a little interesting thought. Many years ago, back in, I guess, it was BC, Burning Crusade, not biblical BC. During Burning Crusade's initial release, maybe a month after it, is when I actually started to play World of Warcraft. And then I played World of Warcraft through BC, and then what was after that? Wrath of the Lich King, I guess. And then I played Cataclysm. Didn't play Mist of Pandaria. Throughout that time, of course, I was off and on. I never really stayed, like, the entire time, just, really that heavily into that game. But at the times that I was heavily into that game, for sure I was cracking out on it, as do many players that play it. And one of the things that I kind of noticed a lot in that game, and it kind of really opened my eyes to kind of just every game out there at this point, but specifically this symptom is there because of this infection that's in regards to multiplayer games specifically. I started to notice how the online community, and you guys are going to get all upset about this if ever my channel, actually makes it and people actually start paying attention to my videos. But the online community, the online gaming community is the worst community of people ever. Yeah, that's exaggeration. Obviously, there's far more terrible people doing far more terrible things in life. But Western world problems, first world problems. The online gaming community really are a bunch of terrible people. I don't mean the typical thing of like, oh, this person's trolling this person or all that kind of nonsense. No, I'm just talking about the way that they infect, the video gaming industry. And obviously, because this is where they're at, multiplayer games in particular. See, devs create a product. This product is through a long process of creativity. Ultimately, the developers are creating a very artistic expression for you to play through. That is what a video game is. It's a form of art. It gets lost in translation and whatever, and due to monetization and whatever, which is what I talked about a little bit in my previous video. But it's still art. And if you go back in time, these forms of art, or rather these art projects, were given to us and they were fantastic things. It's what the video game industry was built upon. And I'm talking about just classics from Mario to Chrono Trigger to Final Fantasies, so on and so forth, Fallout 1 and 2. Now we're getting to this point with online gaming. And now all of a sudden the consumer is getting involved in a brand new way. The way that they're getting involved is they're able to have a voice in regards to this art process. And the reality is, that's a bunch of nonsense. Do you think that when Leonardo da Vinci was doing any of his paintings or any of his other work, because he did all kinds of things, that if he had his little fanboy sitting on the side, I think that you should make Mona Lisa have a mustache because that's fantastic. Do you think that would make any sense? Like, no, it wouldn't. And his art would suffer because of this. He wouldn't become anywhere near as famous as he is today if he was doing that. If he had some backseat driver telling him what he should or shouldn't do. Now, is the Mona Lisa something that everybody loves? I don't like it. I don't think that it's one of the best pieces of art out there. But it is what it is. And the integrity of that painting, you can't deny. Now, fast forward to where we're at now. You have a game like World of Warcraft. And I'll even see why I choose World of Warcraft is because I can boil it down. I can reveal this really easily through World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft was this game that all of a sudden Blizzard decided to let... How can I put this? They decided to let the players pick up underneath the skirt of the devs to see what was going on in there. Or here's a better analogy. They allowed them to look behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz. How did they do this? Very, very simply. They did this through recount. I'm sure anybody out there who's played World of Warcraft knows what recount is. That's not the point of this. Anybody who doesn't know what recount is, by the way, I'm going to tell you really quickly. It was a way to look into the game's data in order for you to see the exact amount of damage per second, right? The equation of the damage output of your character and other things, okay? But we're just going to keep it simple. For you to be able to maximize the efficiency of your damage output. In other words, you could learn which piece of gear and what point to allocate in your talents in order to make yourself just completely optimized and do the most damage per second, DPS, possible. That sounds great, right? But it actually isn't. That's just a whole bunch of geeks geeking out. The reality is that you don't need that information. I'll prove it to you in the blink of an eye. You ready for it? All you people out there that think that DPS matters and all this just crap, here it goes. You name me one single expansion in the World of Warcraft where the boss fights, as in the highest level raid bosses, don't pretty much fall under, a 6-minute mark. So you were doing I'm just throwing numbers out there, guys. Don't fucking flame me because I know that this isn't actually what it is, but once upon a time, back in vanilla, you were doing 100 DPS. Then BC was 1,000. Then Wrath of the Lich King, it was 100,000. Then they did Cataclysm, it was 5 million. And then they number crunched it at some point. Blah blah blah. You get the point. Were the boss fights different? When you jumped from doing 100 to 5 million DPS, were you killing the current bosses any quicker? No. Some bosses were maybe 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes. Most bosses fall around 6-minute mark, and then occasionally you have a boss that's longer than that, randomly 8 minutes or whatever. Usually just due to the interesting mechanics that were going on. Yogg Saron, back in fucking Ulduar, for example. Anybody out there who doesn't know anything that I'm talking about, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to kind of, relate it to you. The point is that the only thing that happens when you have access to that information, when you have access to that precious data, is you end up killing the magic that the developers have. Ultimately, the art is lying to you. This is right. For example, now let's rewind even further back in time. Mario. If you knew that when Mario jumped on a turtle, he did 10,000 DPS, and when Luigi jumped on a turtle, he did only 2,000 DPS, mathematically speaking, Mario's the shit. You would never take Luigi, because Mario does better DPS. But what's the reality? It still only took one jump. It still only took them to jump on the head of the turtle once, each. So it didn't really matter that for some reason the devs programmed whatever. And that holds true to World of Warcraft. There's this idea of competition online, though, however. Everybody wants to be first, which I thought was hysterical back then, because if you're not getting paid to play games, you're not first. There's no such thing as a progression guild if you're going online to look up a strat for your guild. Period. No such thing. You're not progressing, you're following. You're not cutting edge, you're a follower. You're a typical gamer that doesn't get paid to play games, and that's totally fine. So, the only people that would even remotely benefit whatsoever from knowing that information are people that get paid to play the game anyways. Make sense? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. For the rest of us, it causes the developers to create the game based on these restrictions. Because now they know that we know, so there's no more magic, right? We see through the veil. And so it causes them to have to create the game in a specific way. It confines their creativity to a much smaller box than initially they would have. And this creates a video game experience that is subpar to what even our own imaginations at times expect. and then we start getting disgruntled and frustrated and so on and so forth with the outcome of the product that we're playing. This is what it is, guys. So when you go and you play a video game and all of a sudden you're like, man, this didn't meet my expectations. When it comes to online gaming, it's largely due to the players wanting to give their input on what they think should and shouldn't happen. And these developers, through monetization, it's not completely our fault, although it is very heavily within our control. And some of it should be, and a huge portion of it, which is what I'm talking about right here, shouldn't be. What's in our control, what should be in our control as a consumer, is they give us a product that we don't like, and we punish them for it by not supporting them financially anymore. We don't give them our money for their next product. We just give them middle fingers, fix your shit, and then maybe we'll talk again in the future. That's where us as consumers have power and control, and that's what we should control. What we shouldn't control is what the developers actually give us otherwise. We shouldn't be on forums saying, I want this to be buffed and that to be buffed, and there's this and that, and why aren't you doing this, and cry, and oh, Mercy in Overwatch, resurrects too many players. That's a whole bunch of nonsense, and I don't like it when Reaper sneaks out of the corner and one-shots me in the face, lower his damage, and oh, my mage isn't doing so well in PvP, he needs to be buffed, and rogues need to be nerfed because they're stealthing around, stunning everybody. Leave all this up to the developers, man. If you don't like the game, then just go play something else. It's not ultimately your game to create. And as much as you think that you're making the game better, it's really just turning it all into a shit show. And you're not allowing the developers to focus on things that actually matter. And I'll give you an example of what that actually would be. Going back to what I was saying in regards to DPS and boss fights, you have the developers creating boss fights in regards to them knowing that you will know how to DPS completely optimally. Not efficiently, not well, to the absolute best. 80%, even if you're a terrible player, most likely you're still going to be doing just ridiculous amounts of DPS. This causes them to have to create the fight in a very specific way. There's always a cookie cutter way that this fight is going to break down, and that's why we always end up having enrage timers of approximately 6 minutes. Because if we didn't, it would just be too easy, right? No matter what, we would eventually down this boss because players would die. We'd have a 10-man raid or at this moment or whatever it is, but it used to be 20 and 40-man raid. You start losing so many people, but it really wouldn't matter because you could ultimately finish it with 3. A tank, a healer, and a DPS, you're good. So they need to do certain things in order to whatever. But this takes away from what they could do outside of that. Because they could be creating encounters that were so much more involved in other ways. But no, we're just stuck looking at this one picture. We don't want to look at any other potential art that they could create in regards to boss encounters, right? In the World of Warcraft. Or pick any other game. We don't want to see what else they could do in Diablo 3. In regards to the types of things that they create, we just want them to make sure that our Raker set is top every tier, every time, every season. So it's not ever letting these developers actually have creative freedom to finally give us a product again that can be as monumental as the Final Fantasy VIIs and the Chrono Triggers and the Mario Brothers even of their heyday. Can you imagine us as just uninformed? Not all of us are artists, are we? Right? Can you imagine us as uninformed and just with our useless opinions, right? Can you imagine if Squaresoft, I think it was at the time, Square Enix or whatever it is now and whatever it was then, imagine they were listening to all of us when they were creating Final Fantasy VII? Just let that sink in. Do you know how hysterical that is? You know how terrible that game would be? It would be as terrible as any game, or the majority of games nowadays. Because now it's bleeding from this online community and their effect, because so much money has been made here that all these other these gaming companies want a piece of that pie. So they're starting to not only do this for multiplayer games, right? But they're also doing this for even single-player games. It's starting to transcend over. All this nonsense is starting to bleed over and infect the entire gaming industry as a whole. And even in single-player games, we just have too much influence into the actual product in such a negative way. Even if you think it's positive, people, it really isn't. Just stick to your, I'm going to purchase the game or not. That's the control that we have. If honestly the product was terrible, punish them for it. Otherwise, let the artist be. Let them give you the art to then make a decision on afterwards. Don't be a backseat art driver, all right? Take it easy.